Today, we spotlight Bangladesh, a country in transition after a historic change of power. Mass protests erupted around the country in July and early August, fueled by accusations of undemocratic practices. Authorities report that there were at least 1,000 casualties in clashes. Students were at the forefront of the protest movement. Then Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina and her ruling government had long faced a backlash for detaining critics. Uncertainty over inflation and employment also contributed to public dissent. Hasina finally fled Bangladesh in early August. After 15 years in power, her administration had collapsed. The interim government has pledged to place top priority on stabilizing security. 1 month on, how do students whose protests stoke this historic political change feel about the future of their country? NHK World's Mitamura Taro spoke to some of those who were involved in the movement.
21-year-old Saiful Islam was detained by police after joining the protests. He said he was repeatedly beaten, kicked, and given electric shocks. He can no longer walk without assistance. He said he tried to stop police from attacking a fellow demonstrator and was detained for interfering.
I yelled at the police to kill me, but they kept torturing me. They beat and kicked me.
The student was eventually freed after the police fled, fearing they could face retaliation after the government's fall. While being tortured, the police injected him with a drug which has affected his eyesight. But he still believes it was worth the sacrifice.
We don't want people to ever forget that we were able to win freedom only with sacrifices and bloodshed.
Hamida Janat Moni is another protester who served as a regional student leader. She helped maintain traffic control in place of the police. Hamida and her fellow students strongly urged Nobel Peace Prize laureate Muhammad Yunus to become the leader of the interim government. They hope Yunus, who is devoted to helping the poor, will press ahead with reforms to put in place a democratic system in Bangladesh.
He will be able to fulfill, as he dreamed to have a better nation as Bangladesh. So we are completely hopeful to him that he will be the change maker. He will unite the entire country and change the country, and Bangladesh will be the best country in this South Asia or in this world in sometimes.
Some of the core student leaders have joined the interim government so as to be involved in the reforms. I spoke with one of them.
If there's any more discrimination, illicit actions, or repression, we'll definitely stand up against such acts.
We're now joined by our reporter, Mitamura Taro in New Delhi. So, Taro, the students must really have been angry considering their protests led to Hasina's ouster. Can you tell us more about what spurred the protests?
Yes, their discontent burst out over the harsh employment situation and rampant corruption under Hasina's rule. What brought it to a head was the quota system for highly priced government jobs. Their anger was based on the assumption that the Hasina administration was favoring its own support base. The unemployment rate among university students is high, and they thought the quotas were extremely unfair.
And how is the fact that the students put their lives on the line being received?
Yes, it is worth noting that students and citizens stood up against the government. The interim leader, Muhammad Yunus, said he will never forget the students and others who rallied, often sacrificing their own lives and sustaining heavy injuries. He has expressed his intention to support the victims and their families. An expert agrees that the student involvement was important.
And I will not be surprised that if they form a political party, if this pressure of the student is no more, I don't see any hope of a bright future, economically developed, well-living Bangladesh. This is kind of a last hope for us.
Bangladesh is now looking to rebuild. Can you tell us what issues need to be tackled?
Well, the country faces a number of challenges. Inflation has caused the cost of food to soar by 10%, dealing a blow to consumers. Discontent among economically depressed citizens was one of the major factors leading to the toppling of the Hasina administration. The interim government must rebuild the country's economy. Furthermore, there have been massive floods. Providing greater support to devastated areas is an urgent task.
Thank you. We'll hear more from Taro after his next report. A major issue under Hasina's rule was the detainment of people critical of the government. Many are still missing. Let's explore the human rights abuses that have come to light following the fall of the former government.
About 200 family members rallied calling for the swift rescue of people who went missing during Hasina's reign. There are believed to be at least 700 victims of so-called enforced disappearances by security forces. They include people linked to opposition parties and human rights activists. Their families say now that Hasina's government is no longer in power, they can hold gatherings without fear of repression.
আমার ছেলে ইশরাক আহমেদ কানাডা মেডিকেল ইউনিভার্সিটিতে পড়তো রমজানের ছুটিতে সে 2017 সালের 27 আগস্ট আমার বাসার সামনে ইস্টার ক্লাব থেকে গুম হয়ে যায়
The rally participants seek the return of their loved ones. 13-year-old Adiba Islam Holdi was holding a photo of her father. Parvez Hossain was an opposition party supporter who is thought to have been abducted by security forces 11 years ago. They often targeted critics of Hasina.
আমি আমার বাবার হাত ধরে স্কুলে যেতে চাই আমি এই ছবি ধরতে চাই না আমি আমার বাবার হাত ধরতে চাই আমার বাবাকে ফিরিয়ে দিন
Adiba's mother, Fauzana, was 4 months pregnant when her husband disappeared. She said she searched everywhere looking for him. Her son Araf, who was not yet born, is now 11 years old. She desperately wants her son to meet his father, whom he has never seen.
আমার হাজবেন্ডকে আমার কতটুকু প্রয়োজন ছিল সেটা অনুভূতি আমি কাউকে বুঝাইতে পারব না ও বাংলাদেশে থাকলে ওর বিচার হইতো বিচার হইলে তাহলে ওর মানে আমরা আমাদের লোকগুলোর কথা জানতে পারতাম আর আমার একটাই দাবি চাওয়া যে হাসিনাকে যে খুব দ্রুত যাতে ইন্ডিয়া থেকে আনা হয় এবং ওর বিচারের কাজগুলো শুরু হয়
বাবা আমার সাথে থাকতো হয়তো আমার আর এইভাবে কান্না করতে হইতো না যে আমার বাবা নাই
Adiba's family have been waiting to hear from the authorities about the whereabouts of her father. They and the relatives of other victims now hope to get a clue after the change of administration.
We're joined again by our reporter, Mitamura Taro. So, Taro, how is the interim government handling the missing people cases?
Well, it plans to investigate human rights abuses and repression by the former administration. It has also decided to look into the enforced disappearances and is launching a commission to find the victims. I talked with some families of missing people who said Hasina was responsible for the disappearances and that she needs to return to Bangladesh to answer questions.
And what are the odds that Hasina, who is currently in self-imposed exile in India, will ever be held accountable?
Well, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has a close relationship with Hasina. Following India's last general election, she was invited to attend the swearing-in ceremony for Modi's third term in office. When Hasina fled her country, she again went to India. At this point, there are no indications that New Delhi will hand her over. Bangladesh's ex-prime minister already faces nearly 100 charges, including murder, in connection with police repression. India, which is already facing an awkward diplomatic dilemma, could come under greater pressure from Bangladesh.
I see. Now, there have been reports that people who collaborated with the former government are being singled out. That's another concern, isn't it?
After Hasina fled, several buildings used by people linked to the former ruling party were reportedly set on fire. Attacks on police stations also reportedly occurred around the country. I saw many students were still protesting after Hasina's fall, demanding that pro-Hasina public servants be removed from their jobs. The demonstrators stressed they must keep up the momentum they gained through the change of power. The opposition parties, whose actions have been curbed by the former government, are now stepping up their activities. But experts say concerns have emerged that political rivalries could be intensified. The challenge is to achieve public reconciliation and lay the groundwork for a democratic election.
Thank you for your insights, Taro. So far, no election date has been announced. NHK World will continue to monitor developments in Bangladesh and report on prospects for a fair election.